Hello and welcome back to Deep Drive powered by Kotak Mahindra Prime. This is our weekly podcast where we talk about all things automotive. I'm Hormazd Sorabjee.
And I'm Sergius Barretto. And on this podcast, Hormazd, we've got something really interesting, legacy, right?
Absolutely. We're going to be talking about legacy, brand strength, how important are brands, old brands, new brands, especially for car buyers, because cars are generally very, very emotional. Some people really believe in brand strength. They believe some brands blindly and will continue buying that brand. And I'm not just talking about a car brand, could be a model line as well. We've seen it with City, Fortuner. These are the typical brands people just kind of gravitate back to. Innova, for example. So I think clearly, brands has a certain resonance. But I think, looking at new age customers, Gen Z, which everyone likes to talk about, is there that much brand loyalty? They are willing to switch. They don't really kind of look at what the legacy necessarily is. That's why I think you've got new, let's say, incumbents coming in with brands which are not even heard of and doing fairly well. So I think, really, it's an opportunity for these new brands. They don't have to kind of break a kind of mental barrier that there is in consumers' heads. But Sergius, let's start off. I think let's start off with some of the top brands that there are, and they're going chugging along. And really, sometimes, I think the discussion is, does the brand sometimes make a product and success, or is it the other way around, or does a product make a brand? I think it starts with that. And I think clearly we've got some very interesting examples.
Absolutely, Hormaz. In fact, a very good example I would like to use is the Duster. Right, the Duster is such a strong brand. It's back as we know. Of course, the model continued internationally, but it's reintroduced in India. Renault does not feature on the front of the car. It's Duster for India, and at the same time, the sister car, the Nissan Terrano, we know is not coming back as a Terrano.
That's right.
It just
Coming
goes
back
to
to
show
the
you,
Tecton.
as a Tecton. So it goes to show you that there is a lot to be had for the
No,
name as
that
well.
is a good point, because I think the Duster was the original mid-size SUV, as we said before. It started the mid-size SUV segment, and the Duster had really a very special appeal about it. Right size, that had that K9K diesel. Now there's no diesel, of course. But I think what Renault has cleverly done, they've really kept a lot of the design DNA. It's got that rough and tough kind of image, which what the earlier Duster was. It's not as sophisticated or urbane as, let's say, the new Kushaq, for example, which we've also driven. So I think really this is, and I think the media drive they did also was a very good idea. They did it up in the hills, beyond Dehradun, some really bad roads, twisty roads, typical environment where you would drive the car. So I think you're right. Duster, huge brand. I think even bigger than Renault.
Right.
While though we had the Quid, but I think Duster really was that original hook, the most aspirational brand which they had. And Sergius, another brand is Sierra. Though I don't think it's as big as Duster is. I think Tata kind of harking back to a past which not too many people remember.
I think there's more nostalgia there than
There's more nostalgia. Exactly. There's a lot more nostalgia. It's obviously something, people love nostalgia.
Right.
I think cars are something which, as I said, are so emotive. Nostalgia plays a very key role in it. And I think they're playing on the nostalgia, because Sierra really, sold in very few numbers, has been off the market for almost 30 years till it came back. So I think Tata have done a good job really evoking that name, though there are some elements that are somewhat similar, but really it's not a Sierra reborn.
It's not a continuation.
Better it's not, because that car also had issues, in terms of reliability and things like that. And of course, even in the body style, in terms of the just two doors. So I think the Duster is really, you can see the lineage quite clearly.
Absolutely. And always since you're talking of Sierra, yes, it is a brand reborn. It's not a product continuation. And it's like you said, it's Tata have done a wonderful job. But we've had examples of this before. Like, for example, I would think of the Santro. Santro was stopped for a long time. There was a new car that came in, the Zen, the Estilo, which was the MR wagon.
That's right.
In Japan, they decided to slap on the Zen badge. Didn't do well. So I don't think it's necessarily a guarantee of success if you bring in a nostalgic or a cherished brand onto a product that doesn't kind of match.
No, you're right. And I think in a way with Sierra, there was no great brand expectation, to be honest, because it's a car which not many people
Right.
know. It sold in very few numbers, as I said, in a long, long time back. I mean, if you see, I think the main appeal of the Sierra is the design.
Right.
I mean, everyone just loves the looks. They're going in for that. That's even what the dealers say. That is just the road presence it has. We've spoken to a lot of dealers, and a lot of them saying people are just loving the looks.
And that was the original also, right? I mean, the presence of that car.
It was.
It was a
That's
big
right.
car.
But I think
then.
when you look at Duster, people do remember the Duster, and there's an expectation. Is it like the old
Attributes, yeah.
Duster? And it is. Whereas Santro, again, there was not too much of a gap.
Right.
It sold in, lakhs and lakhs. So there was an expectation of the new Santro being like the old Santro. And the biggest mistake they made, it wasn't tall boy.
Hmm.
It was a much more
Yeah.
conventional hat.
Correct.
The Santro was a very radical looking car. I mean, the looks were actually really radical, in
Yeah,
terms
yeah.
of
I didn't like the first
really,
gen. Yeah, it was
frog eyes or whatever, and that kind of
Correct.
toothy grill.
So-
But it did click purely on the technology. I think really that tall boy design, it kind of coined the word tall boy,
Hmm.
which really came in. And then, of course, Wagon-R also took on. But that original tall boy was the Santro. So when the new one came and it didn't live up to those kind of absolute brand attributes, I think it was a problem. I think
Same thing happened to the Zen.
absolutely. The original Zen was sporty.
Correct.
It was low. It had a lot of dynamic
Correct.
appeal. And then you had this
tall boy.
exactly, which was a tall boy.
Went the other way.
And a very cheap car, I think it was, I think it was the YL6. And really, if you looked at the suspension of the Estilo, it was an I-arm. It wasn't even an L-arm. It was very cheaply made car, So it means even with that sort of suspension, you didn't have the sportiness you would want, because with an I-arm, you really don't get the kind of, suspension locations that you want, for absolute precision and rigidity. So it really didn't fit the bill there as well. And again, it flopped. So it's, just bringing a brand back, if you don't live up to the brand attributes of the product, it's not going to work.
It's not going to work. True, absolutely. And what was the MR wagon, as it was called there, the Zen Estilo? Here, they dropped the Zen word. Later, it became the Estilo only. It still didn't do well. But, I don't know what you think, but I actually think that the Zen, brought back again for its third coming in India, could do well if the product matched. I don't think it sullied the brand name, right? I mean, the Zen...
It did, but I think
it
it would. But I think what's happened is that the Swift has become the natural successor to the Zen.
Fair point, yeah.
Where would you fit in the Zen? Because clearly, I don't think there's feasibility now to bring in a sporty car below the Swift.
Below the Swift.
It's just, economically not going to
there isn't a gap.
Make sense, So, I mean, that, as you said, the MR wagon, it was quite, well priced at that time, the way they had got it. But again, that kind of, that shape itself really didn't work. The Zen was really a proper two-box car, which actually the Swift is. In fact, I remember Avik telling us that they were talking about rebadging the Swift the Zen. So clearly the DNA is there. The Zen has kind of become the Swift. So I don't think there's really place for another Zen now.
Hormazd, while we are on Maruti, I have there's a list here. I have to read this out to you because when making this list, it kind of surprised me that, when you think of legacy brands, you do think of very emotional car companies. But one of the most rational car companies, Maruti, seems to have the most strongest legacy brands. I mean, if you look at, we just spoke of, the Zen, the Swift, you've got the Gypsy, you've got the Maruti Wagon-R, the Swift, the 800. They've had a lot of strong brands, right? Built on strong products.
So I think the way these brands have been built is over continuity, over the fact that they have proved themselves to be products that you can rely on and depend on, and done it generation and generation. I think before that, to me, a classic example is the Omni.
Yes.
Which sell for 30 plus years. You talk to the Maruti guys, some customers who are on their fourth and fifth Omni.
The same Omni, yeah.
They would just replace it with an Omni because it really fit the bill of what they wanted. Now, we know that car was unsafe, and frankly, in the end, the safety regs killed it.
Yeah.
Because there's no frontal protection at all. But what it did, for, let's say, a middle-class family at that time, it was really practical. It was their MPV, super cheap to buy, to run, absolutely bulletproof reliability.
Yeah.
Pretty sturdy as well, despite those small wheels. It's an amazing product, actually. I mean, for me, the Omni is such a kind of, an underdog, an uncool product no one really gives attention to. But really, it's actually been one of the heroes of Maruti's range. And as you said, of course, 800 we know, which is there.
Correct.
And absolutely, just Maruti, by the fact that it's 40 plus years in the market, definitely does have a lot of legacy. Man, Gypsy as well.
Right.
And clearly, if you look, the Jimny, somehow didn't get it again. It didn't really fulfill what let's say the Gypsy was in many ways. So
yeah, because the Gypsy had presence and it was very peppy to drive. I mean,
right,
I remember the 1 liter, yes, okay, but then the 1.3, the King,
the Gypsy King,
that was lovely to drive. I remember it launched. I drove a friend's car. It was lively.
And to me, the Gypsy was possibly the only brand that was kind of enhanced and made big through motorsport.
Yes.
I think motorsport played a key role in kind of giving the Gypsy brand that halo. No other car, no motorsport hasn't done that to any other car in India, but only the Gypsy. It was a de facto rally car.
Correct.
Everyone used it. Himalayan rallies, all that. It was just Gypsy. It was just dominated rallying in that age, for a couple of decades.
Correct.
So I think clearly, right from the mid 80s, for into 2000s, so it was really the car that, I think everyone looked for rallying. And honestly, I think, Himalayan rally wins at that time, national championships, all in the Gypsy, definitely did play a role in creating a certain brand aura for it.
True. And Hormazd, while we are on Indian brands, there's also Mahindra.
Yeah.
Another company which is creating right now strong brands to the point where they're actually doing what JLR want to do, right? A house of brands. They want to grow each of these into their own brands. Scorpio, very strong brand today, the Scorpio N. We've got the Classic as well running. You've got the Thar. Okay, compared to the Scorpio, maybe a little newcomer, but still I think building up very strongly.
Yeah, no, I think Scorpio. I think, and we've said this before. I think what Mahindra, what everyone envies is that probably it is the only car company with the strongest brands. If you look at it, Scorpio,
right?
Thar, Bolero. I mean, these three account for a huge number of sales, and they just are mega brands. Conversely, if you look at Tata Motors, frankly, they really don't have a hero strong brand, and the brands they have, you don't necessarily want to build back, like the Indica.
Yeah, I guess
Indica stood for let's say poor quality, taxi, little down market, too mass. And I think it was a tricky situation at that time to drop the Indica name altogether, which they did. I don't think Ratan Tata was too happy about it because that was his baby. But it made sense again. So, the question is, will they bring Indica back? They can, but I don't think it would serve any purpose because really, I think, the image of Indica is very different from, let's say, what an image of even a Bolero or a Scorpio is.
That's true. And I think what happened for the Indica was they carried it on for too long. Product quality never really improved, and it created many.
It did improve, but it was a moving target.
Yeah, it was a moving target. Yeah,
I mean, it definitely improved, and towards the end, it was better.
But even the taxi owners, they weren't really happy. And I remember this was with an Indica and even with the Sumo, another brand that they probably couldn't bring back. Is fleet operators weren't happy with it. They would always say, I still remember this example where there was a guy who said, look, if I have to service a 100-car contract, I can get away with like 110 Koalises, for rotation for service and things like that.
Downtime.
Downtime, exactly. He says, whereas to service a 100-car order with a fleet of Sumos, I need 125.
Yeah.
So, that told you the
downtime.
Yeah.
No, I mean, the Sumo obviously had its benefit of phenomenal space and comfort. The ride was very, very good and the space was great. But again, quality and durability was definitely an issue. Yeah.
Do you think they could bring that back, Hormazd, the Tata Sumo brand name on their MPV, which they are always saying they will do at some point?
I think so, but I don't know. See, if you remember, they brought the Sumo Grande, which was a flop because they tried to make that a very upmarket vehicle using the Sumo name. It didn't work. Frankly, product wasn't also that great.
Yeah, product hardly.
I don't know whether Sumo would fly that much today at all.
Not even on the MPV space.
Yeah, because I think these are both IndyCar and Sumo have very strong commercial connotations, in the fleet segment, which really isn't very, let's say, hasn't got a lot of appeal. So I think perhaps they wouldn't do that. Whereas Sierra, again, a lot of nostalgia, as we talked, it really worked well. Same with Safari. Safari, again, actually was a solid brand which they had. But again, we've talked about this again. They haven't really been able to translate the earlier DNA of the Safari into the current one. So, though Safari as a product right now, it's selling more on the strength of it as a product than any real
Brand
brand
value.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I guess you're right, Hormazd. I mean, I was thinking of the Sumo more because, like you said, space, and it's instilled in everyone's head that the Sumo was for this really big, spacious vehicle. Perhaps MPV reborn, problems fixed might work because we've seen this actually with Maruti. They've brought back a brand on a different body style, the Baleno.
Yeah.
Right? It
But
was
absolutely, a Baleno was a sedan. But again, Sergius, I think there was a big gap. People don't really remember the original Baleno.
it didn't sell too well.
It
Also,
didn't
yes.
sell too well, and really, so there's no real reference point or kind of, let's say, strong brand recall in that sense. But again, coming back to Tata's, you said on space and all. One thing about Tata as a thing is they've always aced space. Their space has always been a strong point of the car, whether right from the Indica
Or the Nano.
exactly. So space, it's really one on space. And I think the one area where even the Safari beats the 7XO, which really is the segment best right now, is in the third row space.
Yeah.
So clearly, I think space is one thing which is very synonymous with the Tata brand. I think that's part of the legacy which they constantly work on.
Right.
But again, with space comes a lot of challenges, weight, cost. We've seen again space in the Sierra, top class, I think best in class again. So I think really, certain brands are also have a legacy in what they kind of attribute they've traditionally been very strong at.
Absolutely. And Ora, since we're talking about space, we have to talk about MPVs, the Innova, right?
Yeah.
It's another very, very strong brand. I think even should it come to the point where they have to discontinue the Innova Crista, I'm sure the Innova brand is just going to go on, right? I mean,
yeah, I think Innova is probably one of the most enduring brands in the country. The kind you buy with your eyes closed. I think it's just got absolute blind loyalty. Of course, in that segment, people again are much more risk averse. They want to go with a trusted brand. It's more the brand there that's more important. They're not as experimental as, let's say, new age buyers for EVs and things like that. So that's why even Ertiga, Innova, there's this, I think they will just keep going on and on as long as people want basic, no nonsense, super reliable people movers.
exactly.
And, I think they don't want the frills and fancies and things like that. And I think as long as these brands stick to their core attributes, which they do fantastically well. I mean, Toyota is one company that sticks to its core attributes better than anyone. So people just keep buying it again and again.
Yeah. In fact, Hormazd, I think the Innova and the Fortuner could go the way of the Land Cruiser as in expand the brand umbrella. Like you have the Land Cruiser Prado, etc. Because you look at the Fortuner, another great example of, like you said, sticking to its core value, the DNA. Right from the first gen Fortuner that we've had to the current one, it has this certain, I wouldn't say charm, but I mean a certain sort of personality it throws out, which has been stayed true to all through the generations.
Absolutely.
And I think these two brands are really strong and they can grow. Perhaps we'll see a mini Fortuners someday, and we talk about it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it is entirely possible because I think clearly there is scope below, but I think, that's a Land Cruiser FJ which might fill that gap. So, I mean, it's all about how do you want to position the brand. Maybe the Fortuner is in that space alone. Toyota happy with those couple of thousand a month, and let's say going forward, what is the future of body on frame? What is the future of diesel? This will be key inflection points for these strong brands which have been built on these very attributes. And that's why coming back to the Duster was built on that K9K diesel engine. So, again, it's not there in the current Duster, so a very key brand attribute or a selling point of the brand is missing. So it'll be interesting to see how it does. Of course, we've driven the Duster and it's a phenomenal vehicle. I really enjoyed driving it. Really, for me, it is really for that segment. If you're looking at something to drive, that is really the one to go for. But again, the diesel will be missed because it was such a strong part of the Duster DNA.
And what was this? Actually, I like what you said. The core value on which a brand was built. If that is no longer in existence, or if that's shifting, you could have trouble. For example, the City. It was a very strong sedan brand, but today sedans aren't strong.
That's right.
Right?
Exactly.
And the City seems to be just floundering.
Yeah, that's right.
You know,
Absolutely.
it's though I don't think the brand is dead. I think that, you know, if they do infuse you know, some this thing into the product, like we know, the Virtus is actually now the largest seller, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, in the sedan segment. It should have been the City, given that it had its whole brand heritage. You know,
Absolutely. I think, it's a bit of being a bit complacent from Honda, not giving enough focus, not giving up enough investment. I think that's all going to change with Honda kind of relooking at India. What we know is that the new City is going to be extremely radical in its design. And we've seen, let's say, City going radical after generations. Seen the first three, each one was totally different from the others.
yeah.
Then you came to the fourth and fifth are very similar.
Yeah.
So really then they've become more kind of templatized
Right.
and a little bit more safe. So that absolute innovation which Honda had, we saw it around the first three cities.
Right.
Absolutely phenomenal. And that's really what drove the brand, So again, what's missing in the City is what the earlier brand attributes were, that bit of innovation and engineering excellence. Even in that funny looking Gen 2 City, which they call the Dolphin now,
Yeah.
the space efficiency was fantastic. You had those magic seats, you had the fuel tank in the front. So there's always some sort of, let's say, innovation in there, which we are not seeing right now with Honda so much. They're really kind of playing it safe. Of course, they build cars which are super reliable. You never have a really unhappy Honda customer. But again, the cost factor has crept in. NVH, is compromised. We've seen that in, the locally built Hondas. So I think that's where the Germans have also taken it ahead, given more engine options, which Honda doesn't do. So I think it's time for Honda to really reinvent the City. And I'm sure the City would bounce back because, again, it's one of, I think after the E-Class, the oldest running brand in India.
The nameplate,
in 1998 when it was launched at the Auto Expo. So that's about, 27, 28 years.
8 years, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's, so I think, and there are cities everywhere, and again, I think what makes a brand is how it is proven generation after generation after generation.
But, that's a very interesting observation, Lotus, that you said. The City, with the first two generations, it didn't stick to its product attributes, but innovation really built that brand. Because I remember seeing it and I was very puzzled when you went from the first gen to the second, and then it's like, this seems to be no connection between the two
No
cars
connection.
at all.
Absolutely. Each one, you couldn't tell it was had any connection with the City, especially second gen and third gen.
Yes, exactly.
They just complete radical change from something that was practical, very family oriented, something a little bit more sportier.
Yeah, exactly. The arrow shot, I think they
arrow shot
right?
design, yeah. And the earlier one with the, it had the twin spark, the two spark engine. ISD, what I
ISDI,
I said ISD. I'm forgetting now.
Yeah.
Phenomenal on fuel efficiency. In fact, it had some crazy claimed fuel efficiency, and they were so confident of the fuel efficiency that they could run a smaller tank because the fuel efficiency was so good. I think it was a 40-liter tank, 45-liter tank, I'm not sure, but it was a smaller than normal tank. So I think clearly innovation is what made the City, and of course the way it drove. And I think right now they've really lost that.
Right. And Hormazd, so that's a brand I think we both agree should sort of maybe get a shot in the arm. But there's another brand where I think you and I have some maybe differing opinion, is the Ambassador.
Yeah.
You don't like that at all, right?
No, I'll tell you one thing. I just hated the Ambassador. I make no bones about it. Yeah, it's got that great nostalgia. But having grown up as a kid, even to be honest, before I was 18, driving it, I think, going from second to first, no synchro mesh. It was really an art to do that, a real skill, double declutching in there. Terrible gearbox. It always that fuel pump which was right near the exhaust manifold, always vapor lock. It was unreliable, terrible in summers, horrible steering, though it was quite an accurate rack and pinion steering. Terrible brakes. It was just one of those cars which I wouldn't, I don't know what was good about it. And more than that, the Ambassador stood for all that was wrong with the Indian auto industry at that time. Heavily regulated, no R&D, completely monopolistic, closed economy. It was just, the way India was at that time. It was a very, very closed economy. And I think, so I think I don't think Stellantis will bring this brand back. In fact, I think, Stellantis bought the brand, paid that crazy amount of 70 crores. So 70 crores, I think maybe even 80 crores. I'm not sure on the figure, but 70 to 80 crores for the ambassador brand. It just doesn't make sense paying that kind of money. I mean, why would you do that? I think they bought the brand from Hindustan Motors, which was, I think, a BIFR company at that time. And honestly, I don't really know, let's say the legalities at that time, but it could have been possible that the money Stellantis paid HM, which was a PSA at that time. It could have could have been taken and given to the creditors. But whereas when you buy the brand, that's your IP or whatever. So I think maybe it was a way
of keeping the money.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, 70 crores for the ambassador brand.
Right.
I just don't think it doesn't make sense paying that much.
I fully agree with the valuation there. But I just see the brand as something that also stood for sort of space, palatial. The sofa actually in the rear. It wasn't even, I would say, seats.
You're right, but to make an ambassador today, a modern ambassador, it's going to be impossible only by regulation.
Yeah, of course.
You'll just not be able to meet it. And, the design requirements for, let's say, you need a certain amount of aero, you need, let's say, crash requirements. I don't think you could make, an ambassador today. And frankly, it's a sedan.
Right.
So there's no real demand
the market
for sedans
has shifted.
anymore. So I don't think we will ever see ambassador returning.
Right.
Definitely not as a modern avatar of what it was.
Right.
In fact, I don't think we will see it returning at all.
Yeah, in fact, you're right. I mean, if they wanted to, actually, it could have been the Basalt, which is like a lifted sedan, comfy oriented. But you're right, it doesn't have the brand sort of maybe.
No, exactly. Why would you call a Basalt an ambassador? It just doesn't make sense at all. I think you would really downgrade the product. I think same reason why Tata, I don't think, will bring the Indica badge down. These brands have served their purpose.
Right.
It's best to remember them in history books.
Right.
I don't think reviving them would really add value.
Exactly.
This is not the brand you would want to revive in this day and age. Sure. It really stood for something, of a different era at that time. And, it's not had that continuity where the brand has evolved.
Right.
For example, all the other brands, let's say what's been around since the Indica has been, maybe something like a Bolero. It's constantly evolved. Actually, it's still very relevant right now.
Yeah, it's going to be one of their independent brand, like the house of brand pillars.
Exactly. So I think, ambassador, I really can't see it evolving into a modern day ambassador.
Right. So, Hormazd, we've discussed a lot of brands, specific brands, but we have to also discuss the buyers of these brands, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's essentially what the brand gets built on: customers, customer loyalty. I think in the past, yes, we've seen it's been really strong. Do you think that's the case today, though? Brand loyalty. Do people just buy a brand first?
No, I think with the younger generation, I don't think brand loyalty is as strong as it was earlier. Really, I think they're much more experimental. Right. They are looking at better design, better features, to kind of products that suit their lifestyle better than what the brand stands for. For example, I think that's become very critical. So I think that's where EVs really, have a good chance. Let's say new players,
new manufacturers. Yeah,
exactly. So I mean, even VinFast,
right?
To come in. I mean, they've done fairly well. They could do better.
For the past, I think 3 or 4 months, they've outsold Hyundai.
Yeah, that's right.
So
exactly. So that tells you something. A completely new brand. Not too many vehicles, maybe 400-500 a month or whatever it is. So VinFast doing about 400-500 a month. You even got BYD, which is again, that's fully imported as well. Very small numbers, but again doing better than let's say a lot of legacy brands which are existing in the market already right now. So I think with EVs, there is, a lot of scope for buyers to try completely new brands. And I think this is, again, where JSW has some opportunity. But again, the I think the customers are a lot more demanding. So while they're willing to try a new brand, I think, you cannot fail them in what the brand promises in it. So I think they know they have options. They know they're spending a lot. And as a result, I think they're becoming a lot more demanding and not as forgiving as it earlier was. So, and and then I think the older set of buyers, who've traditionally grown up with legacy brands,
Okay.
as we said, with Innovas, with Fortuners, who, and let's say even who just want to buy an MPV, even an Ertiga, for example, who would stick to a kind of tried and proven formula and don't want to really experiment or go into something with better features as well. I think Creta is a classic example of how strong the brand is. Because if you look at it, all these new SUVs come to kind of take market share of the Creta, but the Creta is still top dog despite everyone coming. So again, I think that is the strength of the Creta brand, again, built up over a decade. So, it takes a lot to build a brand and, very little to destroy it sometimes. So, preserving the brand, constantly feeding the brand has to be nourished for it to kind of really be there at the top of the game. And I think that's where Honda in a way has failed. They haven't really nourished the brand enough, to keep it, give it the kind of due it's had in the past.
Yeah, and it's really sad, Hormazd, in Honda's case, because they've had strong international brands too that came to India, like the Accord, right? Global brand in the US, biggest selling with the Camry, the Civic, the CRV. You've had these brands here, which, like you said, they just didn't nourish. They just didn't, just keep them alive.
Yeah. And I think, I'll be honest, I think Honda also, from their product strategy, I think they've jumped into the segments that are declining. They've fundamentally been sedans, let's say the City, the Civic, and the Accord.
Right.
CRV, of course, was an SUV at that time and, should have been. But I think, for Honda, I think they could have leveraged their brand so much more, and they haven't done it.
So, right, Hormazd, we've discussed brands, we've discussed customers. Before we end, we should, I think, perhaps pick which do we think is the strongest brand in India. I mean, for me, I would look at, if not the top, but definitely arguably at least the top one is the Maruti Swift. It's the Swift, rather. It's just got such a strong brand value. Doesn't matter what Maruti do to to market the car. We've seen that sometimes not enough has changed with a generation. It looked like the previous.
Yeah.
The new engine, we've said, okay, it's more fuel efficient, but not peppy. But whatever, it just keeps selling.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think it will keep going. With just its name.
The Swift is absolutely a very strong brand. Though I personally think Maruti has diluted what the original brand was.
Yeah.
From the 1.3 G series engine
peppy
right now
engine,
to a 3-cylinder fuel efficient engine. In fact, it's even down on power from what it used to be earlier, which, for a hot hatch is the opposite thing to do. But as you said, the
it's just the name.
strong.
The brand is strong.
It keeps going. Yeah, I think for me, without a doubt, it's the Innova.
Yeah.
I think Innova, 20 years, it's just been absolute amazing. A brand goes on. And for me, the value of the brand also is how it is in the used car market. They get picked up like that. They hold very high resale values. So I think, it's that absolute nameplate which everyone trusts. Not a very, let's say, emotional love brand, but still it is a brand. So I think if you're looking at absolute emotion, I would say probably Scorpio, over the period it's been there. I think really there's a certain kind of aura Scorpio has and a certain type of Scorpio buyer also. So which is so intrinsic to the brand. It's one of those brands people buy to reflect their personality. Whereas Innova is a brand which people buy because it's just one word, and that is total trust. So that's it from us on this podcast, which was all about brands. Do let us know in the comments which brands you think are the strongest in India. Well, thanks for watching. See you again, same time next week, Saturday, 11 o'clock in the morning. And you can also catch us on our other podcast platforms, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks for watching.